Hello and welcome back to Hoi 4, Equestria at War, the realm of Kiria under Rainshine. And today's episode, we're just oh my goodness, we have more stuff. What is this? Journal entries? I was just opening that up and was like, wait, that's not something I recognize. We have journal entries? Okay, I'm even more excited now. But because that reminds me of the Okay, calm yourself. But to start, we've got a lot of cities to learn about to understand the lore of our nation. So let's start with the north. The Pearl of Kyria, the second tenet of the Way of Fire. Oh, can we get what is the first tenet? There's the fourth. The first tenet. Okay. We're actually going to start with the first tenet, just because that feels right to me. The first tenet of the Way of Fire. Make peace with the self. Fuel carelessly burnt with create a raging inferno. Fire left unattended will wither and die out. The fire that burns within one's breast must be carefully nurtured, so that it may safely provide the light and warmth that will sustain them. Along the seat of the Vermilion dynasty, the city of Vermilion has served as the imperial castle of the realm of Kyria since its foundation. It was in the mountains surrounding the hidden city that the religion known as the Way of Fire is said to have had its genesis, where the monks and mystics came down from the mountains to share everything they had learned from the communing with the divine fire being Concord, with the local population. In time, as the Way of Fire spread throughout the realm of Kyria, the city only grew in importance and size. Due to its spiritual and political importance as the birthplace of the Way of Fire and the seat of the Vermilion dynasty, Vermilion became the largest city in the realm, complete with sprawling palace complex, a bureaucratic and diplomatic quarter, and magnificent gardens. Though this was not to last, as Kyria entered a period of tumultuous change brought about by the advent of industrialization and capitalism. The teaching of the Way of Fire could no longer calm the excesses of populace, drunk on the heady prospects of modernization. In 902, a merchant protest against decree of matriarch superior Nocturne charm restricting the establishment of monoculture tea plantations in the Vermilion Basin was converted by a mob of commoners enraged that the merchants would question the wisdom and authority of the matriarch. No Kieran is sure who changed first, but in the midst of the brawling, some Kieran turned into a Neric, and the chaos spread like wildfire. So, who changed first? No one is sure who shot first. Wow, okay, sure. By the end of the day, 4/5 of Vermilion had been burnt to the ground, with the last flames finally extinguished only a week later. The Inferno claimed hundreds of... This also reminds me... This might just be me because I know way too much about this one period, but it reminds me of Justinian the Great, when the Great Fires burned all the important cities, like the Great Sophia and stuff like that. That's probably just me. I know way too much about Justinian. That he's a very specific part of history. But anyways, moving on. Injuring tens of thousands. Most of Vermilion population was left homeless. It was the scars left upon Nocturne charm's psyche by this tragedy that would directly lead to a series of radical decrees and proclamations that established silence. Vermilion was slowly rebuilt over the following century, and still serves as the seat of the Vermilion dynasty, though the silence has robbed it of all its authority. Yet here, more than anywhere else in the realm, the Way of Fire is still strong, and the matriarch's authority still holds absolute sway over Kieran that live here. Following the determined efforts of an equestrian diplomatic mission to make contact with Matriarch Superior Rainshine in 1006 at ALB, the silence was lifted locally around the city. Now Vermilion is growing at a rate it hasn't seen in a century, and one day it may reclaim its status as the crown jewel of the Kieran realm. So the science ended somewhere last year. That's a recent development. Okay, interesting. The second tenet, the Way of the Fire. Make peace with your neighbor. The flames of one's fire can, if left unchecked, ignite an entire forest. Just as one nurtures their own flame, they must be sure that their flame does not ignite their neighbor's tinder. Once the entryway into the realm of Kyria, the port city of Fragrance has long been an import trading city, with strong maritime traditions and independent cultural identity. Frigates once handled the bulk of the realm's trade between the Deer of the North and the Parrots of Macawea, with some traders reaching as far as the southern Graphonia during the city's most prosperous years. As such, it was always the first to receive new ideas and put them into action, helping to further culturally separate the city from the rest of the Kyrian heartlands, as species from all across the globe settled into the city to open businesses and ply their trade. It was also the city of fragrance that the modernization of Kiria began, with the advent of capitalism and the establishment of ever-growing Kyrian bourgeoisies, only further radicalizing the changes happening within the city. There was some pushback from local leaders who feared that modernization of the country would come between the common Kyrian and the divine authority of their matriarch, but these voices were unable to stop the changes happening to the city. Within years, Fragrance had grown into the richest city in Kiria, and it seemed like it would only grow richer with time. The silence put a swift and brutal end to that. When the decrees from the capital outlawed money, property, and hierarchy organization, this economy of Fragrance collapsed overnight. The trade routes the city needed to thrive simply disappeared, and the workers that toiled in the factories returned to the countryside to farm. Though bourgeoisie and merchants from throughout the realm fled to Fragrance in hope to salvage their businesses and way of life, the damage had already been done. Fragrance, a city built around trade and business, suddenly lost its purpose. In time, Fragrance returned to less morally responsible activities to sustain itself and its populace. Pirates, smugglers, and mercenaries sought to keep the city alive, and its citizens fed by finding some way of bringing money into the city. The Kyrian navy, mothballed in the city's massive harbor, mutinied, with many sailors turning to piracy to provide for themselves and their family. In the centuries since the silence was decreed, what remained of the city of Fragrance had only grown more radicalized and resentful of the imperial dynasty that had crippled it so. Now, with the silence beginning to lift across the realm, Fragrance sees a chance to reclaim its former glowing, and maybe exact its revenge. I don't like the sound of that. The third tenet of the Way of Fire: make peace with Concord. Concord is wise and benevolent. She who shaped the world from the primordial fires, and entrusted within the Kyrian species the last spark of the great inferno, strive to understand her wisdom and teachings, and to anchor oneself in peace and harmony with the world around them. Isolated from both the great Mellifluve that runs through most of the realm, and the smaller, but no less majestic, Carmen River, the prosperous hill city of Rhapsody, straddles the headwaters that form the Jubilee River. Rhapsody, unlike the rest of Kyrian cities in the realm of Kiria, is an artificial construct. The Vermilion priestess, Iridescent Dawn, who became the realm's first matriarch superior and founder of the Vermilion dynasty, chanced upon the uninhabited and pristine spot while traveling to the mountain peaks to meditate in the presence of the great fire goddess Concord. When she rested at the site for the night, she fell in love with its beauty and splendor, and felt that this land had more than in almost anywhere else in Kiria been blessed by Concord herself. Before she departed to continue her ascent to the mountain tops, the priestess decreed the spot where she rested a suitable, auspicious site to build a city dedicated to the reverence of Concord, and began to directly organize the settlement of the region when she returned to Vermilion. A small conjure of Vermilion priests led tens of thousands of followers over the mountains and hills between the capital and the decreed spot, choosing the name Rhapsody upon breaking ground for the first building, in celebration of many hymns praising Concord the expedition sang on their journey. In time, Rhapsody would grow to become an impressive metropolis devoted to the study and worship of Concord's teaching, going to rival both Vermilion and Fragrance in spite of, or perhaps owing to, its relative isolation from either. It was this isolation that allowed Rhapsody to flourish despite the imposition of the silence. In 779, a rebellious sectlet of Vermilion priests relocated to the city after expressing their dissatisfaction with the reigning matriarch's policies and supposedly hedonistic lifestyle. Over the following decade, this branch of theocracy worked to distance Rhapsody from what they saw as a crumbling divine authority of the Vermilion dynasty and Vermilion, though they never went so far as to outright say so. The Kyrian of Rhapsody soon came to believe that they knew the Way of Fire better than the scholars and mystics in the capital, and as such they had a truer interpretation of the Concord's teaching than even the matriarch. Though this caused friction between Vermilion and Rhapsody, nothing came of it until the Silence was decreed in 902 ALB, while the rest of the nation slowly began to crumble, decay, and decentralize as a result of Matriarch Superior's noxious charms decrees. Rhapsody resisted them, believing that the Matriarch had wrongly interpreted the Concord's divine solution to the Lyric problem. While the cities across the realm slowly depopulated as the Silence strengthened, many fled to Rhapsody, which continued to grow in size and influence. The city carefully wielded its religious fervor to halt the changes and modernization that had caused so much chaos in the rest of the realm, without resorting to the implementing the Matriarch's policies, and so survived the intervening century relatively unscathed. Nowadays, Rhapsody boasts the largest population in all of the realm, and the city is larger and more prosperous than any other Kirin city in the world. The Kirin of Rhapsody are fiercely independent and envision themselves as cut above the rest of their kind, powered and enlightened by their interpretation of Concord's teachings. But with the silence ending throughout the realm, only time will tell if Rhapsody can hang on to its status as the leading center of enlightenment in the nation, or if it will fall behind the imperial capital once more. Whoa, that is a large population, yeah. 2.2 million, yeesh. So that's number one. So let's see, can I find... I'll go to the other ones after, but I want to go through the tenets first. The Scorched City, the fourth tenet of the Way of Fire. Resist the impulses of the Inferno. A raging fire tamed becomes an invaluable tool of progress. So too must one master the fire that rages within them. Reject destruction, save for as the absolute last resort of self-preservation. Nestled in a fertile branch of the great Melfluve River, Sorghum is dominated by the farmland and rolling plains that once made it the breadbasket of the realm of Kyria. So great was its importance in keeping the people of Kyria fed, that Matriarch Superior Moonlight Glow once remarked that, so long as there is peace and plenty in Sorghum, then there shall be peace and plenty throughout the realm. Humbled by the favor the divine Matriarch gave them, the people of Sorghum and the surrounding farmland began to refer to their small corner of the realm as Peace and Plenty, a name that soon found its way into official records in the capital. Yet Sorghum was not always peaceful, nor did it have plenty to offer for Kirin that lived there. While much of the modern realm of Kyria had united under the Way of the Fire by 552 ALB, Sorghum and surrounding lands remained an independent, brutal state, under the hoof of the cruel lord known as Cinderscales. Under his rule, thousands of peasants were slain in a failed uprising to put down by his fiercely loyal and disciplined soldiers, and mystics in the city of Verdant once claimed that the only thing the Fisher Kirin could catch for a season were the bodies of slaughtered peasants from up north, their split blood tinging the river crimson. Attempting to put a stop to the horrible atrocities happening in Sorghum, and finally unify the nation, the Vermilion priestess, Irresistant Dawn, ventured into Sorghum with a procession of her fellow priests and priestesses to convince Cinderscales and the followers to repent of their sinful ways, and embrace the wisdom of the fire goddess Concord. Cinderscale imprisoned the procession instead, yet when he attempted to execute the monks upon a massive funeral pyre to show how powerless their deity was, Iridescent Dawn instead emerged from the fire as a majestic Kirin, twice the size of every other Kirin, seemingly gifted with Concord's divine blessing. The warlord repented upon seeing the display of divinity, with a promise to build the city's first temple in the Way of Fire and Concord. Sorghum was finally integrated into the realm as the city in which the first Matriarch Superior of the Vermilion dynasty had consummated her ascension. Like the rest of the realm, the imposition of the silence on the nation has seen Sorghum's fortune slowly decline. The city itself has largely been depopulated, with most of the inhabitants moving back out into Sorghum's ample farmlands to resume their way of life before the introduction of modernization. Now with the signs beginning to recede across the nation, Sorghum stands ready to return to its glory it once held. And perhaps peace and plenty will return to the city of Iridescent Dawn's ascension once more. That's nice. Hopefully. Maybe. Okay. Just seeing if... The fifth tenet of the Way of Fire. Reject the corruption of one's gifts. Everything that one is, one owes to the blessings and wisdom of the Concord. Her gifts are generous and beatific. The fire's warmth of cold winter night. reject the temptation to use her gifts to suffocate the fires of another. The city of Verdant dominates the last branch of magnificent Great Mulfuve River, where the waters bring in trade and goods from all throughout the realm of Kiria, where the Great Mulfuve three branches meet. A massive stretch of floodplains and small islands have arisen, creating fertile and plentiful ground for an expanding and powerful city. Verdant is that city, once strong and grand, on a level to rival even the city of Rhapsody far to the east. And even wrestling with the city of Fragrance as the realm's most important trading city. Verdant controls all of the trade flowing out to the realm of the Heartlands into the South Kirin Sea, and once enjoyed close trade ties with the city of Blossom in the nearby breakaway state of Sinkin, where other cities such as Rhapsody, Fragrance, and even the imperial capital of Vermilion grew up and out into dense cities. Verdant capitalized on its unique geography by spreading out across the Great Mulfuve, with raising communities perched on the many islands and the flat river banks, causing the city to completely dominate the mouth of the river. Spread out as it is, roads within and around the city are small and scarce. Rather, the Kirin of Verdant travel from place to place, using hundreds of canals and thousands of small boats. This serves them well during the spring flood season, where the banks of the Great Mulfuve swell and the river can rise as high as 10 meters, submerging any surface roads for weeks at a time. To combat this, the buildings of Verdant are raised on wooden and bamboo stilts that keep them elevated above the Great Mulfuve in all but the worst floods. When the river is at its highest during the flooding season, the islands in the waters disappear, and the raised buildings appear to float on the water, thus giving rise to its second moniker, the city that floats. So it's Venice, basically. The collapse of the river trade during the institution of the Silence took a great toll on the city's economy. Without a reliable stream of goods and trade flowing down the river towards the city, Verdant's economy sharply contracted, forcing the growing capitalist and industrialist classes to flee north to Fragrance, the city that still desperately tried to maintain trade relations with the rest of Zebrica, and so the best remaining hope for business Kirin to hold on to what assets they had left. As for the rest of the Kirin in Verdant, many migrated out of the city into surrounding farmlands to take up subsistence farming, or slowly isolated themselves into one of the city's many island communities, taking up fishing to survive. With the cities fragmenting into dozens, if not hundreds of communities isolated by waters and canal, it was perhaps a surprise to find that the city did not suffer or decline too greatly in power and influence in the region. Seeing the resilience of their city, many priests and mystics of the Way of Fire took this as a sign that the Silence could yet be compatible with the teachings of the Concord, and pointed towards the cumulation of the city's communities for proof. Over the decades, this way of thinking has created a new sect of the Way of Fire, known as the Rising Fire, which argues that improved and reorganized communal societies can keep the realm strong while also paying homage to Concord and abiding the decrees of the Silence. For now, the priests and mystics of the Rising Fire only hold sway over Verdant and the cities connecting to the western branches of the Great Mulfuve. But were the Silence to end, surely they would begin to take their ideas further inland and spread their teachings far and wide. Let's see. Do we have a 6? Doesn't seem like it. No 6. There's just 5. Just 5 tenants. The Vermilion Gateway. The closest port to the Kirin capital of Vermilion, the city of Radiance, has long been named the Vermilion Gateway by travelers and traders. With the gleaming waters of the Kirin Sea to the east, the craggy peaks of the Maritime Range to the west, south, and the redwood forest on the opposite bank of the Willow River to the north, the city of Radiance occupies a favorable location on Kira's mountainous eastern seaboard. Up until the Silence, the city of Radiance received hundreds of ships a year, each carrying traders, petitioners, and foreign dignitaries on their way to the capital of Vermilion, where the matriarch superior of the Vermilion dynasty rules over the realm. I'll tell you this, the city lore makes up for the fact that there's not much military leader lore. 100%. There's so much city lore. Oh my goodness. Though not as important of a trading city as Fragrance or Verdant, Radiance was able to maintain a robust economy and a healthy population due to its importance and proximity to Vermilion, and had begun to rival Fragrance in the years leading up to the Silence. The roads connecting it to Vermilion were some of the largest and most modern in the realm, before the Silence wrapped the nation in its stifling grip, and many nobles and members of the Vermilion dynasty maintained homes and estates in and around the city to enjoy the warm weather of summer by the shore. Unfortunately, its greatest strength became its most crippling weakness when the Silence was declared more than a century ago. With the advent of the Silence, petitioners and foreign dignitaries seeking an audience with the matriarch superior dwindled to nothing, and trade between Vermilion and Radiance all but ceased. The roads connecting the cities fell into disrepair, and Radiance's economy entirely collapsed. A mass exodus from the city began, though many still remained, hoping that one day the Silence would be lifted, and they could return to their former glory as Vermilion Gateway. So diminished was their status that the Equestrian delegation of 1006 that sought to establish contact with the reclusive Kirin bypassed the city entirely, instead docking the city of Verdant and making their way up the Great Malafloof to arrive in Vermilion by the long route. But with the Silence now ending in Kyria and the Way of Fire returning in full force to the city, Radiant's future is beginning to look brighter. Kyria are moving back into the city, and with the foreign dignitaries and petitioners once more attempting to make their way to Vermilion to meet the Matriarch Superior Rainshine, Radiance has found its purpose again. Should things continue to improve, then, Concord willing, Radiance may one day return to its former glory, and maybe even begin to rival Fragrance in terms of its portents to Kyria's trade. Maybe. We can hope. So we've seen you, and we've seen you. Okay, so we can move from those. The Halfway City. Known as the Halfway City, Massacot has long served as a potent stop in any journey up the Great Malafloof to visit the heart of Vermilion Dynasty. It is positioned halfway along the Yellowwood River between Sorghum and the imperial capital of Vermilion. Previously a shallow and narrow tributary of the Great Malafloof, the Yellowwood River was widened and deepened in a series of canal-building public works projects. During the reign of Matriarch Superior Moonlight Glow, the result was a straightened and channelized waterway, robust with weirs and locks that made it navigable to most Kirin watercraft, save for the largest junks. That became officially known as the Moonlight Navigation. In the centuries since the Way of Fire united the Kirin communities into a theocracy, Massacot has played host to countless dignitaries and pilgrims, both Kirin and outsider, who have traveled to meet the Matriarch Superior of the Vermilion Dynasty. The city is renowned for its beautiful sights and splendid temples, and many priests and mystics of the Way of Fire have traveled to the city to commune better with nature to understand the Fire Goddess Concord's teachings. The Vermilion Dynasty also retains a winter palace in the city, though it has not seen use in well over 100 years, even prior to the Silence. Massacot suffered a particularly harsh decline during the Silence. No creature had sailed up the Great Malafloof to see the Matriarch Superior in over a century, and so the city found itself struggling for a new purpose as its population faded away. Its priests and mystics deserted the city for exterminatic exile. In 1006, however, it received a rejuvenation of purpose, as it played host to the Equestrian diplomatic delegation seeking to establish ties with the isolated Kirin realm. The diplomats, Fluttershy and Applejack, were warmly welcomed by the city, especially when it made it clear they planned on visiting Matriarch Superior Rainshine and ending the Silence in Kyria, seeing a chance to undo the stifling decrees that had slowly been draining the life out of their city. The residents of Massacot made sure that the Equestrian delegation was well supplied for the remaining leg of that journey, and several mystics from the Way of Fire accompanied them to the capital. Their mission was a success, and now, with the Silence beginning to end in Kyria, the residents of Massacot are hopeful that one day their city will be able to regain its status as the Halfway City, once more welcoming and preparing visitors for their meeting with the Matriarch Superior. Okay, that's cool. The Pirate Haven, Auburn Isle. When the Silence began, the theocracy of the realm of Kyria was forced to mothball the dozens of warships that made up the backbone of Kyria's once impressive navy. With the Imperial Navy all but disbanded, many captains and their crew decided to mutiny rather than watch their ships rot in Fragrance Harbor, and themselves consigned to uncertain fates in the Silence realm. Fleeing from the city and the last vestiges of imperial authority that Vermilion dynasty commanded, and the decrees that made up the science took effect throughout the nation. The crews of these ships turned to piracy to survive. These pirates, trained and disciplined from their service in the Imperial Navy, quickly proved to be fearsome predators in the Kyrian seas and the Gulf of Samar, with some even striking as far north as the Jarldom of Citadel, or as far south as the island that made up the Xerdis archipelago. When these that's a long range. When these neighboring nations mustered up a response to drive the pirates back, the pirates quickly established a home base and safe havens on the Auburn Isle, which they seized without a fight from a token imperial garrison unable to communicate with any centralized authority on the mainland. In the centuries since, these pirates have continued to operate out of the port of Nakri, undisturbed by the Vermilion dynasty on the mainland and unable to be crushed by the navies of neighboring states. But now, with the science beginning to end in Kiria, and their autonomy likely to be challenged in the near future, the golden age of piracy in eastern Zebrica is coming to its end. For the maritime brigades living on the island, it is time to adapt or die. There's no other option. Yeah, I suppose so. That's the 5th tenant. And, okay, over here. The Western Citadel. Fed by the waters flowing down the Serenus Strath mountains, the city of Curacil is the most westward urban province, the realm of Kiria. As such, it has long held its own sense of self-identity. Given the sparse population of Western Kiria when compared to the densely populated East, the region has historically been somewhat of a backwater. Insulted from the hustle and bustle of the Eastern dynastic heartland, even the tumultuous centuries before the Way of Fire and had unified Kiria, Curacil had avoided the worst of the bloodshed and violence commonplace throughout the realm, for few built-up towns and settlements inhabited the rural western countryside, and thus organized conflict between different Kyrian communities rarely erupted. In those times, the settlement of Curacil served as an informal hub for riverine trade along the western tributaries of the Great Multiflume. Then merely a sparsely populated fishing village would eventually swell in size as farmer and crass Kyrian would travel there in mass during the summer to sell their goods to river traders. Obviously, so many Kyrian traveling to one city would more often than not result in tempers flaring, but the impediments of the gathering spot and its temporary structures lent itself well to weathering Neuric transformations, and so the annual convergence continued without too much trouble. They only underwent true urban development once the Way of Fire had been introduced to the area, allowing the Kyrian communities to establish a larger, more permanent settlement along the river, with the teachings and tenets of the Fire Goddess Concord serving as a means to suppress the Neuric state and facilitate the integration of the nearby rural communities into the city. They have, ever since then, served as a unifying hub that connects the rural western communities to the authority and decrees of the Vermilion dynasty, and its influence reaches even the most isolated communities in the western realm. However, the science effectively separated the city from the capital of Vermilion and the rest of the realm. They've now left as a lonely hub of religious authority in the west, found itself desperately trying to maintain connection with the cities further down the Great Multifluva, asking for instructions and support from both its neighbors and urban centers and the Fire Goddess. As the population declined, Kyrian began to return to their neighboring communities. The city might have dissolved entirely had it not been for revitalization of religious preaching and fervor spread by the city of Verdant, which had begun professing its own sect of the Way of Fire, known as Rising Fire, and the new teachings which promised a way of marry the decrees of the silence to egalitarian communalist ideals. The leaders there found hope that they could keep their city from fading away again, as it once had done centuries ago. With its authority and control over the West, they have begun spreading the teachings of the Rising Fire to the rural communities surrounding it, and thanks to their efforts, the sect is firmly rooted in the Western realm. With the science ending, however, there must soon come a reckoning between the Way of Fire in the East and the Rising Fire in the West. Only time will tell if they can peacefully reconcile with long-distance Vermilion, and once again serve as a hub of imperial authority in the West. Or of it will instead try to spread the new religious sect all the way down the Great Multifluve, potentially altering Kyrian society forever. But we will check out these other cities because they are also important to us. Because, well, they're more lore, they used to be part of us. So we'll check out that before starting our focus tree. But we'll do that in the next episode. Yes, we're gonna take over 2 episodes just for the setup. What is this, Equestria? But I can't wait to get into it. I'm enjoying the lore so far, and I hope you are too. But for now, I'll see you in the next episode. If you're enjoying this so far, like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell button. And yes, we're 2 episodes in, and I've not pressed the play button. But anyways, hit the bell button if you want to see this series actually kind of start. But and yeah, as always, peace.